when I worked at newspapers, my assignment one year was to write a feature story about a live nativity scene where they had cows and sheep and people. They had a camel. Actually, I think it was a llama, but it's supposed to be a camel. But anyway, I wrote about how this nativity scene would help people feel the Christmas story with their senses. They could see the animals and the Holy Family. They could hear the bleating of the sheep and the mooing of the cows. And they could smell the barnyard smells of the animals. Anyway, that's what I wrote, and that's what got in the newspaper. And I remember my editor telling me later she'd meant to take out that part about the smells because she was afraid that people would complain about it. Well, nobody complained. That was really part of the point of the live animal nativity scene, to help people immerse themselves in what it really was like. But it struck me how my editor wanted to clean up this image of the nativity scene, as if to say that it smelled of sheep and cows was somehow something that we should not speak about, as if Christmas must be this perfect Hallmark card of perfection. And of course, we know better. We know that the hay smelled like hay and the cows smelled like cows, and that childbirth is a messy and a scary thing. And we know that Mary was probably scared, and so was Joseph. And we also know that the Christmas message came into a world that wasn't just a Hallmark card. It was a violent and hostile world. The land was occupied by a brutal foreign army, and most people lived in poverty. Healthcare was very primitive. Children would wind up being killed at the whim of a vicious ruler who thought he could stop the rise of the one that the wise men told him was born king of the Jews. And to say all that about how bad the world was is to encourage you if you think that things aren't looking very good in the world this Christmas. If you're like me and you've become disheartened with all the violence and unrest you see in our country, and with all the violence and unrest that we see in the Middle East, where people seeking to establish a religious kingdom are cutting off the heads of innocent captives, and if you're discouraged by terrible things like the Ebola outbreak in Africa, or even get discouraged by the silly things like the clueless, selfishness of the Kardashians, then you should know that the world was even worse at that first Christmas. And had CNN been around then, they'd have covered the daily insult of the Roman army camped in your Holy Land, and the crushing poverty and the relentless hunger, and the riots and the diseases and the unrest. And had reality TV been around, they would have found vain people to parade on camera. And had communications been better, more people would have known right away that a man and his pregnant wife had been turned away from an inn into the darkness. Perhaps some people would have tried to help them. Perhaps others would have tried to rob them, or simply gone on with their own concerns as if there was no concern of theirs. In any event, the world was worse than it was now at the first Christmas. And yet Christmas came. And there's a great deal of comfort in that. And we love to take a respite from the ugliness of the world around us. And we sit and smile as the children put on their Christmas play with their nativity scene, as the children did here last Sunday. And I hope that you were able to see that. It was a wonderful event. There was the Innkeeper and the Holy Family and the angels and the shepherd and the sheep and the wise men. Or, as Indy told us, she was a wise woman, not a wise man. We delight in all of that, as we should, because it was delightful. So if last week you sat and you smiled at the children, today I want to challenge you to see Christmas as an adult. And next week we'll recall the angels singing as we hear our cantata. So we remember the wonder and the innocence of Christmas and the innocence of children. And we'll celebrate in song. And then today we'll be challenged to know that Christmas is a disturbing time of year. And there are powerful scriptures of Christmas that speak to our lives. And that first Christmas was a time when God broke into a sullied, into an awful world. He came into human history not through prophets and the lives of the people of Israel, but incarnated in the world in a new way. And the Gospel of John has a Christmas story. It's different than the other Gospels. It's in one sentence. John says, "And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth." And when Jesus came into the world, he changed the world. And Jesus came to deal with us. Isaiah told us, "A voice cries out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. For every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill shall be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. Then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all the people shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." And it talks of Christmas as the coming of Jesus into the world as a time of upheaval. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill shall be made low. The light has come to all that darkness and strife. The light has come in the midst of all that envy and jealousy and unhappiness and murder and war, and all those despotic rulers and people who would seek to hurt others or put on notice that judgment is here. And God's way is a vision of justice and righteousness and peace. And the evil ways of violence and hatred shall be laid low. You know, we might cheer when we see evil ones getting their comeuppance, like Herod, like Hitler, but we should be challenged in our own lives as well, that the light has come, and we should look at the darkness in our own hearts. God's light burst into the world at Christmas time, and we have warning into our lives. This one from the first letter of John. It says, "If we say we have fellowship with him, that is, with God, while we are walking in darkness, we lie and do not do what is true. But if we walk in the light as he himself is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And the blood of Jesus, his Son, cleanses us from all sin." And the judgment, as the Gospel of John tells us, is that the light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. And so the challenge to you this Christmas is to examine your own heart and your own life. Do you prefer the darkness? Do you hold on to envy and jealousy? Are you involved in drunkenness or adultery or covetousness? And it's not just to try to avoid bad things. Do you follow the teachings of Jesus in helping the downtrodden and encouraging fellow believers? Do your actions and the things that you do moment to moment and hour to hour and day to day show the world that what you profess with your lips as a follower of Jesus is what you truly believe, what you truly live? Is there room in your day-to-day life? Is there truly room in your heart for Jesus? You know, during our Christmas play last week, we saw enacted that scene where the innkeeper shakes his head no to tell Joseph and Mary that there is no room in the inn. And if you read today's passage, you'll see that the innkeeper is not actually mentioned. It simply says there was no place for them in the inn. But it helps us to imagine the scene when we see Joseph and Mary approach and we see that innkeeper shake his head no. And can you imagine if he had known that the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords was seeking shelter there, that he would not have